Hey everybody, this is Howie Ree, and this is my YouTube series From Dorm Room to Startup. The goal of this series is to demystify the startup process for students that are thinking of starting a company while they're still undergrads. Today we're joined by recent grad James Wu, who graduated this past year, and he's going to talk about his experience going through undergrad and starting his company Adaptilab. So thanks for joining us, James.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So why don't we start with, where were you living before undergrad, and what were you like first year of undergrad?
Yeah, so I grew up in Seattle. I was very lucky to be in a very vibrant tech community when I was growing up. So I knew immediately computer science was something important to study. When I came to Duke my first year, I wasn't an intended computer science major, but I did take some computer science classes and found that I enjoyed it. And I also got the opportunity to start working at a research lab right away. And that's really where I got my first exposure to machine learning. And immediately I thought that this is something very cool. It had a lot of applications to different fields that I was interested in. So not even directly to computer science, but I was interested in things like economics and public policy. And I saw that there were a lot of applications of machine learning in those domains as well. And that's really what got me into the computer science space and also the machine learning space.
That's cool. And can you just talk about how did you get connected to a research lab? And then maybe we'll just talk a little bit about what is machine learning. So,
Yeah.
did you see a flyer or did a friend connect you? How'd that go?
Yeah, so I was working, it was actually a lab in the Social Science Research Institute. I saw a flyer just in my first year dorm, I think, and I attended the meeting. They had recently gotten a big funding grant, so they were hiring a lot of students to work. I had some computer science background already at that point, so I was able to pass their interview. And I didn't have any machine learning experience, but I don't think really any of the students that they were hiring at that time did. So we kind of all learned together on how to apply machine learning to their use case, which was focused on Middle Eastern foreign policy.
That's great. And for students that are watching this who are like, I have no idea what learning is, can you just describe what that is?
Yeah, you hear it more right now in media as artificial intelligence. So machine learning is really you take data, and it's either structured or unstructured data, and you're able to derive useful insights from it. So things like Siri and Alexa, that's an example of machine learning. Self-driving cars are machine learning, but there's also a lot more mundane applications, things like sales forecasting, retail prediction. Those are all useful applications of machine learning in industry today.
That's great. And one more thing I want to touch on, because I have a lot of students who are interested in computer science, but they get intimidated at some point along the way. And at some point they're just like, there's no way I can catch up. Did you talk about, how much experience you had in high school? I mean, now you're starting a machine learning startup. I'm going to guess that some students watching this are going to be like, it sounds like James was coding, starting when he was in middle school or something like that. But what was your first exposure to coding, and how deep were you into coding before you got to Duke?
Yeah, I took AP Computer Science in my senior year of high school. It's really kind of funny. I took it with my co-founder today. So that's really both of my first experience and his first experience with coding. And since then, I've been doing a lot of coding and machine learning, but it was really, I didn't start until pretty late in like my teens.
Got it. Great. So let's talk about your first year summer. So what did you end up doing that first year?
Yeah, I did a independent Duke Engage project. So I created my own project to go to Madagascar. I went with one other student, and it was really cool because I actually got to work on some data science and machine learning there. I was working with biological lemur data in Madagascar. I was living in the center of Valbio Research Facility, supervised by a really great lemur researcher. And she basically gave me a lot of free reign to take 20 years of biological data and generate some useful insights from it. And I was able to create a pretty cool project and learn a lot along the way. And hopefully it was actually helpful for the conservation effort.
Mm-hmm. And can you elaborate that on a little bit more? So what do you do with that data, and what insights were you trying to drive for, or did you actually get?
Yeah, the first step was really, and this is the case with like all industry machine learning as well, it's really getting good, clean data that can be used for a machine learning model. So collecting the data literally in the wild, collecting data points on where lemurs are located or where trees and biological instances are located, then structuring that into a robust database, querying the database to get a good data set to work with, and then building models. And my final job was actually trying to build a prediction model to identify where in the national park, so where in the rainforest, the lemurs would be located. The use case we were trying to solve for is it takes a long time for researchers to find lemurs. And obviously, if you can find them faster, you can research them better to help with the conservation effort.
Got it. So you were almost predicting where our lemurs most likely going to be.
Yeah, exactly. Assigning probabilities to each location in the rainforest of where the lemurs would appear.
Got it. So let's move on now to sophomore year. So what did you get involved with sophomore year, or did you continue to focus on the research lab?
Yeah, so I in sophomore year I also decided I really enjoyed statistics. So I ended up when I graduated, I had a double major in computer science and statistics. I think sophomore year I got more into the theoretical nuances of machine learning. And also at the same time, I started learning more about industry machine learning, right? I had done the Duke Engage in the last summer, but I was looking to get an internship in industry, get some experience. I was always really interested in startups. So I got a very lucky position where I became a Freestyle Venture Capital Fellow, and I got the opportunity to work at one of their portfolio companies, AdStage, which is like a Series A startup that's doing some pretty cool stuff in the ad tech space in San Francisco.
So for those that don't know, Freestyle is a venture capital firm that is based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and one of the co-founders is Josh Felser, who's a Duke alum and a Fuqua alum, and so they run this internship program. And so so that must have been like a sophomore summer. That was your first exposure working in the San Francisco Bay Area. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. And I really enjoyed it. I think it was a big part of why I decided I wanted to do a startup myself when I graduated. Just a lot of freedom, a lot of learning, and I like the overall ecosystem of startups and venture capital.
And just so we're clear, that summer your role was as a software engineer. Is that right, at AdStage?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Got it. And talk about just a little bit, what were a couple of the key learnings that you had that summer? So first time, I think, working as a paid software engineer. What do you take away from that experience?
Yeah, it was really great. When I was there, I was like the 9th engineer in their team, like ever. So they had a pretty small engineering team. I reported directly to the CTO. So I was able to get a lot of exposure to how a product is structured from start to finish, and the process also of going into product development and marketing and sales of that product. It was definitely learning more of the entire stack of building a product, rather than if we had been working, like say if I had been working at a large tech company, you only really get that one bit that you work on and you drive that one bit. Whereas here I had a lot of ability to move between products and see a product get carried out from conception to launch.
That's great. And the other aspect I want to talk about with that summer is you're part of the Freestyle Capital summer program. And so I know that Freestyle and Josh, they add on personalization and value add stuff like meeting other companies, spending time with Josh, and just talk a little bit about that. Like what were some of those additional things that you were exposed to that weren't necessarily encompassed in your software engineering internship?
Yeah, I think the biggest value was exposure to the venture capital space and more startup spaces. Like learning just the general terminology of venture capital, like fundraising, how a company needs to build product and how they need to talk with investors, and that entire process was super useful. We actually got to sit in on a lot of pitches between potential companies and Freestyle, and that was a great perspective to have on both the founder side and the venture capital side. And I think it was a big help for me when I eventually started fundraising for my first round.
Great. And one more thing I want to talk about with the summer is that you said yourself that by growing up in Seattle, you were in a tech environment. And for those that don't know, Seattle is the home of Amazon, Microsoft, and many other tech companies. And so going to San Francisco, can you just characterize that a little bit? What was it like, and talk about the pace of San Francisco?
Yeah. So, my company currently, we are located in Seattle, and I've been able to kind of experience the differences in the startup scenes. I'd say San Francisco, everyone just moves a lot faster. Like, people go to jobs faster, they churn out of their jobs faster. Companies will build faster and raise money faster. And I think that's just a nuance of the ecosystem where there's more money in the Bay. So there's more flow of money, right? Both in terms of employees and fundraising opportunities. I do think that I won't get too much into this, but I think there is a pretty big difference in terms of how fundraising is done in Seattle and San Francisco. And there aren't many other options for raising money in terms of different cities. So I think for us, it was always a decision between Seattle and San Francisco about where to base the company. And we were lucky that Seattle has a good B2B SaaS environment. And I can get more into that in the future when we talk about Adaptilab.
That's great. So junior year starts, and you and Alan, your co-founder of Adaptilab and your friend from high school, you make a big decision, which is that both of you decide that you're going to graduate a year early. So you decide to overload, I guess, your courses in junior year. Talk about that decision and how you decided to do that.
Yeah, it actually began in my sophomore year summer. So when I was working as a Freestyle fellow, Alan was also interning at Google. So we were actually living together in the Bay. And we got so much exposure to different opportunities and how fast the startup world was growing in the Bay that we thought, like, we didn't want to miss this. So it's not the typical startup fundraising, or start founding journey where, like, people find a problem and they want to solve it. We decided we wanted to work on a startup because we thought it'd be an interesting experience, and then we started looking for problems to solve. And the first problem that we really got into in junior year was one where we were focusing more on using our machine learning research to be applied to business applications, and I'll get more into that as we keep going.
Yeah, so let's get into that. So generative adversarial networks is a technique that I'm going to ask you to describe here. And your first startup that you worked on as we were getting to know each other was an idea for generative adversarial networks to create really good data sets for corporations, because training data for machine learning is expensive and difficult to do. So let's just talk about, why don't you first start by defining what are generative adversarial networks, and talk about this idea a little bit more and some of the struggles with it.
Yeah, so it was a very new technology at the time. The paper was published by Ian Goodfellow in 2014 on generative adversarial networks, and I'll just call them GANs for simplicity for the rest of this conversation. But Alan and I, we had been doing research on it prior, just out of our own personal interest, and we saw it being used a lot for things like image data, like getting better data sets so that you can train self-driving car models. But self-driving cars is a very, very small subset of industry. We thought it could be applied to many more use cases that are more, mundane, but also more used in industry, like sales forecasting or recommender engines and things like that. So our first approach is really just trying to build a good API. For those that don't know, API, it's a programming tool where you can call it and get an output. And I won't go too much into that. The idea is we wanted to build something that would augment existing machine learning engineers and data scientists' ability to train good models on their industry data sets using GAN technology. And that's really, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, and just so that I make sure I'm clear on how GANs work, the way I understand it is that you have two adversaries, which are both, artificial intelligence instances that are trying their best to generate the best outcome. They compete against each other and repeat, and that just continues again and again. And as they sharpen over time, you get really great results. Is that a fair description of it?
Yeah, exactly. There's a generator network and a discriminator network, and you can pick different architectures for those networks, right? But like it can be varied based on the use case, but that's a good way of thinking about it from a high level. And
Got it.
there's a lot of great content out there now about GANs. It's kind of interesting to think about. Like we were working on that in 2017, and they were still relatively new, but even now I see classes popping up all the time that are just about GANs, and I think that the technology is moving forward pretty quickly.
That's good. And so your first startup, and I don't remember when this exactly was during your junior year. I remember that we were talking about it starting junior spring, which is your senior spring since you graduated earlier. There were some ups and downs with that. So let's just talk about that. What were those?
Yeah, we built an initial beta product, right? We were told, I think told by you and by Steve, to build a product as fast as possible and see if people would want to buy it, right? Get to like minimum viable product and try selling it. So we did that. I think this was around March, so like right when we had joined Melissa and Doug. I was going out trying to talk to some industry connections that you put me in touch with, and we were trying to sell this API. And what we were learning was people really did not care so much about getting a black box solution for machine learning or data science anymore. There was this industry shift over to wanting to build their own machine learning teams in-house. So while we did not get any customers for our product, we did receive many interview requests to try and hire both myself and Alan. And that was an indication to us that there is a bigger problem that we could be facing when we did graduate and start working on a startup. And that was the overall space of machine learning talent in industry.
Yeah. So so the next thing is that, and I forget what month it was, but you were part of the Melissa and Doug Entrepreneurs Program here at Duke. And I remember that we got an email from you, and it was like, hey, we've decided to pivot the company. Don't worry, here's the new prototype. It's out, and we're ready to test it with people. And it was amazing. I don't remember which month it was, but what was the pivot to?
Yeah. So our first goal, both myself and Alan, we had experience both working as full stack software engineers and as machine learning engineers, right? And we kind of felt the use case of machine learning engineering in industry is not that complex compared to, like you do things like GANs and self-driving cars. That's complex. That's stuff that you need like researchers to work on. But just doing like basic sales forecasting or retail prediction, we thought it'd be a very small jump to take a full stack software engineer and train them to become a machine learning engineer to work on those use cases. So the first iteration of Adaptilab, we were basically building this online training platform for upskilling existing engineers to become a competent machine learning engineer in industry. And I think that was where the pivot was decided in May. So after both myself and Alan had graduated and we were working full time. And I think we launched the first version of that product in June.
That's great. And so, the way that I've thought about it is it's sort of like a Coursera course for machine learning, but it's combined with an integrated development environment so that it's kind of both in sync. And I always compared it in my mind to, you could either learn all this stuff online with these kind of these modules online, or you could try to get a textbook and papers online and try to teach it yourself. And so you move back to Seattle, and Alan moves back to Seattle, and you decide that, we're going to go full time on this startup here. And talk about the next several months up until Techstars. What's it like to go back to Seattle to start working on this, and what is that experience?
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of product development. I think we didn't do enough customer discovery, and that I'm kind of foreshadowing what happened in Techstars, but I think we didn't do enough customer discovery at the beginning with the specific solution. We definitely knew that machine learning talent was a big problem, and every company wanted to build machine learning teams. But the upskilling solution, like you described, and to be clear, Adaptilab, we've always been focused on as a B2B company, so selling direct to enterprises. So this like online interactive Coursera course would be geared specifically to companies, engineers, so we could upskill them on their use case. We think selling to like doing a B2B company, especially in Seattle, it's much more accepted than a B2C company. And it made a lot more sense for us because they're the ones that actually have the pain point. That being said, I think we spent a lot of time building a product that we later found out not many people are willing to pay for. Again, so definitely a hard learning curve. The nice thing is, in this time around, a lot of our existing technology that we were building, like this interactive platform for grading machine learning and data science algorithms, as well as our just general content for converting a full stack engineer to a machine learning engineer, we were able to rehash that to some other use cases as we pivoted again. I'll let you get into that.
Yeah, so that's great. And let's jump right into the pivot, actually. So
Okay.
At some point, you joined the Techstars program, and I think you said week 3 or week 4, part of the Techstars program is you spend a weekend kind of thinking about your startup out in the wilderness, and you ended up coming up with a new idea. And so why don't let's just describe that pivot. What did you pivot to?
Yeah, no, I'll give some context as well about what Techstars is. So Techstars, it's a global accelerator network. They do individual accelerators with like 10 to 12 companies in a city. We were lucky to be accepted to Techstars Seattle, which was our dream accelerator, because we got to stay, where we wanted to build our company, and we got a lot of great resources in the Seattle network in terms of building a network and building mentorship. The first couple of weeks of Techstars, so we were accepted in November. The program started in February, and during the November to February time, we were still doing the development of the initial product. We got some sales, actually. We got some pilots with some big companies, which was exciting. But the sales cycle for upskilling existing engineers is super long. It's like 6 months to 12 months because there's no real clear training budget in a company's use case. So anyway, we were going to Techstars with some growing pains, and we were worried about the sales cycle. And we thought we were just going to get like a ton of advice about how to make our sales cycle better for our existing product. Instead, we got instructed to just do more customer discovery. So for the first 3 weeks of Techstars, I probably did over 100 customer calls with like hiring managers and lead engineers in industry to really pinpoint what their problems are with machine learning talent. And by the 4th week, like you mentioned, we did that retreat in the wilderness. And at the end of the time, Techstars asked us to repitch our idea. And at that point, we had honed in on the pain point that hiring machine learning talent is a bigger deal than trying to train them, especially for companies, right? Like companies want immediate result and value out of people that they invest in. And having a good hiring funnel is a good solution, but it's really hard to hire good machine learning engineers. And that's really where the pivot was inspired by. So Adaptilab is now more geared as a B2B SaaS company, software as a service company, for accelerating the machine learning hiring funnel before getting into training and development after we build that trust in the industry.
That's great. So so many kind of questions from this point, but let's start with talking about customer discovery. And so for many students that are watching this that are thinking about starting a company, they've probably already got an idea in mind, and they're like, here's what I'm doing. And I've talked to a few customers, and I think that they've kind of given me validation that this is the right thing. Can you characterize just your evolution of looking at customer discovery from the first product, which was the generative adversarial networks for data, the second product, which was the upscaling engineers to become machine learning engineers, and the third product, the current product, which is the hiring thing. How much customer discovery did you do? I don't know if you have a number there for the first product, how much for the second, and how much for the third, and just talk about that.
Yeah, so I'd say the first product, we didn't really do any, right? Like we were working on research with Ganz originally, and we thought they were super cool. And then we had this hunch that it might be useful. Obviously, that hunch ended up being wrong, and that's why we ended up doing, it was like customer discovery post-product, which is what you never want to be doing because you already spent all that time building the product. When we got to the machine learning talent space and started doing the upskilling idea, I think we really got a bit hung up on the fact that we didn't know our exact customer segment. What ended up happening, because our product could be geared for enterprises and for individuals, we did a lot of customer discovery with like just single full stack developers. who said, "Oh yeah, I'd love to learn to become a machine learning engineer, and this seems like a great platform to do it." Right. And what ended up happening was we're not selling to those full stack engineers, right? We're selling to companies' HR teams or companies like VPs of learning and development. And in those cases, it's much more about having to prove the value of your product to their team immediately. And that's why the sales cycle was super long. It was a more well thought out product. So we actually did have several pilots and customers. We were about, I think, like $5,000 in revenue in the first 2 months of that product when we were deciding to pivot. And I think that was really just because we didn't identify our customer segment very well. It's called like the purchaser. You know, we had ideal users who were giving us good feedback, but we did not find the purchaser. And then the third time around, when I was doing customer discovery for this product, I was really only talking to the purchaser, to the hiring managers and to the lead engineers in the company that would be the ones making the decision for who buys this product. And that's been a huge help for us, and it's why we were able to convert a lot of traction immediately when we built this initial product.
That's great. So just a couple more questions, and then I'm going to let you go. So one is, can you just describe and characterize the Techstars program a little bit more for students that might be like, I've heard of an accelerator, but how is that different from, just doing it on my own? Why don't I just do it on my own? So, I know there's a few elements. There's money that's invested in your company. There's kind of a set time frame. There's the demo day. There's the mentorship. Just talk about that in your experience and how those pieces played a role in your company's success.
Yeah. So I guess straight off the bat, the Techstars Accelerator, the investment, it's like 120,000 for somewhere between 6 to 8% of the company. That's pretty standard across different accelerators that are like considered good in industry. It's not necessarily the greatest investment if you think about just pure money to equity ratio, and that equity is going to be the most expensive equity that you give out. But the idea is they also give a ton of mentorship and a great network to work with. And I'd say we definitely got a lot of value out of the program. I think an accelerator is a really great solution for like students who are just coming out of college and want to start a company, because we don't have as much industry experience, but we do know how to run a process and how to do a playbook, right? Like college is sort of, you go through a process and you adapt to it. And you execute what they tell you to do. And that's sort of what happened in Techstars as well, where they gave us a very clear process where like each week you're supposed to be doing this and this is how you do it. And as we executed it, we found ourselves, getting customers. We found ourselves building a product that people actually wanted, getting customers for that product, getting people on board, and eventually actually fundraising for our next round as well.
That's great. And talk about what it was like to do demo day. So demo day is the formal kind of end of the program, if you will.
Yeah.
How many people were in the audience? What is the format? And what is the goal for everybody that's pitching there?
Yeah, so demo day, it's two parts. Techstars Seattle, they do a demo day for investors in the morning and then a demo day for the community at night. So that morning, I pitched to over 100 investors, Adaptilab as the product. And then that night, I pitched to it was like 500 community members in the Museum of History and Industry in Seattle. For those who know, it's this huge venue. And it was really a great experience to get like immediate feedback. We had done a lot of practice beforehand. Techstars makes sure that the pitches are very polished, and you get through all the points about your company that you want to do. It's about a 5-minute pitch, and it ended up being a great experience to meet people and also just practice like really understanding the story of your company. I think a lot of founders they think that they can sort of explain all the important bits of their company, but when you put them on the stage with only 5 minutes to do it, I found that was a pretty big challenge, and going through the process is really helpful for me.
That's great. And my last question is, let's talk about the Melissa and Doug Entrepreneurs Program and the impact that had on you. So when you joined, it was roughly February of your last year, your senior year, if you will, and you kind of went through the program, and we had our own demo day in November. Just talk about that and what did you get out of that, and how was that helpful to you as you were starting this company?
Yeah. First, of course, like the mentorship from Howie and Steve and Jake and Tati was incredible. Just having at that point, we really didn't, have much instruction in terms of how to build the company. Alan and I knew how to build products, but not much else in the startup space. So getting just continuous mentorship and resources and being connected to your network to, like, I think most of my initial customer calls with the generative adversarial product was through connections from you. That was super helpful. I also think getting the chance to meet some other like-minded entrepreneurs at Duke, right? Like people who are working on their company and who would love to be doing this full time. That was really great. I'm still friends with all of those guys, and being able to talk to them as we're building the product and just having someone to talk to is super useful. And of course, demo day was also a really fun experience. We went to Melissa and Doug's house and we kind of pitched to a bunch of investors as well. We got some money committed on the spot, and we're really lucky that our advisor who invested in us, Ken Weil, he's actually still like very active with the company. Like I do biweekly or monthly meetings with him and get some help on the marketing side of things.
Wonderful. Well, James, we're really proud of you, and thanks for joining us during this busy time as you're building your company. And we're wishing you all the success in the world, and we'll keep on working with you as much as we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Bye.